Hello and welcome to the Band of One podcast. I am Riley Wilson. This podcast is designed to help anybody that wants to start a solo or small group show or get better at and book more often a solo show. I've got over 50 years of live performance experience and will share not only my tips that I've learned during this time, but also the tips of other folks that have been doing the same thing in their neck of the woods. The purpose of this is to give you something actionable and real that you can use right away to help you further your career and have the success that you want. If you like what we do, I hope that you'll not only listen to and subscribe to the podcast, but share it with others. Let's get busy. Once again, we're on with my good buddy, Michael Edwin Q, and we're going to talk today about not the music portion of things, but the booking agent part of things. And as I said, you talk a little bit about this in the other podcast that we did, but becoming a booking agent, that's a different thing. You have to have a whole different skill set than just playing a bunch of tunes in a gig and eating in the kitchen when they tell you that's the only place you can eat. How did you get that?
Well, you still have to talk musicianese,
Yes.
so you have to have some of that. You just don't take somebody off the thing and they don't know the difference between a gig and a gag. So I was in a band with, all right, I'll go back even farther than that. Joan Frank Productions was the number one booking agency all through the 30s, 40s, 50s, and into this, whatever, 60s. They were Southwest number one, very big. They even had their own vans, they had their own dancers, they had their own singers, they had their own orchestra. It was very big. Of course, nothing like that exists anymore. Things have gotten much smaller. But I was in a band with my friend Brad Lee, and we traveled around forever with our band. And then we got to a certain age and point where we said, I don't want to do this no more. We're not getting anywhere outside of work. And it's a lot of work to work. So I went into something else. He went into something else. And he bought Joan Frank Productions because Joan Frank had died and her husband was in his 80s, sold the whole enchilada to him. So he bought it and he was doing quite well with it. And I was doing a single. And finally, he calls me. He says, I'm buying another company. I said, okay, what is it? It's a party company. We do, IBM says we're going to have 400 people. It's all going to be at the the Museum of Art, and we need food for everybody. We need entertainment. So he did all that. And then another time he calls me, he says, I can't do it all on my own. I can't do the booking part and take care of the food. So he says, you want to be a booking agent? And he says, I think you can do it. He taught me a lot of what he knew after 2 years of running the place. So I got a lot of, it's like I said, I knew musicianese already. I knew gigorademy already, but he taught me the rest, and he took me slowly. But it did help, and I did help his business quite a bit after a certain time. And so I wasn't only booking entertainment for all his parties, but at the time, booking agents were very big, and I was booking for all the country clubs, all the different companies, the Christmas parties, everything. And in time, I got to know what I was doing, but it did take a while and a lot of questions asking Brad, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And eventually I got it down to where it was second nature. And it's a lot of fun. It
Let me
was a
ask
lot of fun.
let me ask you a question about this because how many former musicians do you think actually become booking agents?
Uh, I don't know how many. I do know the booking agents are usually musicians.
Okay.
I don't know how many become that, but I know how many agents there are that were musicians at one time. I'd say 90 something percent. They
Interesting.
were entertainers of some form.
So when you're I think this is important because if you're, let's say you played in bands like Michael and I had done for years and years, and you want to do a solo act, when you start talking with booking agents in your area, one of the things to think, I think it's a good idea to keep uppermost in mind is that they probably understand many of the things that you've already done in your career as a performer, and they're probably going to be able to help you out. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But you have to have a good promo pack, something to, you knock on the door, you give them the promo and stuff. But I could tell you some things that people don't think about. Like on my computer, I had, well, different acts. They weren't all musicians. I had casino, I had clowns, you name it. And altogether came to about 2,500 people. But I would always call the same people over and over. But why? Uh, of course, talent has a lot to do with it. He or she is very talented and does what they do very well. Okay, that's the first reason to call them. But the second reason is, how long does it take me to get in touch with you? If I have to leave a message and you call back in 3 days, I don't have anything for you. It's gone. I've got a client on the other line who says, could you get me this by the end of the day, or sooner? I want to know. I can't wait 3 days for you to get back with me. And people do. So they wind up at the bottom. In the bottom, in the sense that if I can't get in touch with anybody else or everybody else is busy, I will call you. But you're not on the first row. You're not on that first rung. Uh, are you honest? Sober? Do you show up on time? If you're late, you remember Kim O'Connor.
Yeah.
God bless. I mean, Kim O'Connor, I'll never forget. I hired him to do a gig and his car broke down. He left his car on the side of the road, took a cab and did the gig and came back. He didn't call me and said, oh, I'm late because my car broke down. He said, how'd the gig go? It went great. Now I got to get back to my car. That's the kind of mentality I was always looking for. So easy to get in touch with, also easy to work with. They don't have that kind of money. What could you do? I don't want to rip you off, but at the same time, you got to bend with this. And so there was all that comes into play till after a while. Piano players, I've got 150. I only call these first five all the time. Guitarists, you were on the top list because you were. I can get in touch with you within an hour, if not immediately. You were honest. You were talented. You showed up on time. You were sober. You got good reviews when I came back on Monday and call how to do. So all those come into play. And if you fall out of that grace, that's it. And don't kid yourself. Other agents talk to each other. Oh, I don't use him. Why? He was giving out his cards, his own private cards at my gig. He's gone. You're gone. Yeah, there's a lot
We
to
did
it.
a video about protocols a while back, and of course that's a very vital one, and that is, you leave with the person who brung you to the dance, so to speak.
Yes, you don't give out your cards. So and I've even had, I think the worst was because I used to play gigs and I went to a gig. I was at a country club and they said, your band did good last week. I said, I didn't book a band here last week. He goes, oh yeah, blah blah blah, and his blah blah blahs were here last week. They did a great job. I said, I didn't book it. I booked them 3 months ago. And he gave his card. And I found that out because it's a small world. It'll be found out. So I stopped booking him because I can't book you. That's it. Because even the contracts, when we did contracts, the contract says you cannot get in touch with that client for a year. After a year, and I'm not getting you anything, call the guy. That's fine. But I have a year to get you another gig there. And if you go behind my back, I don't use you at all. And again, you talk to another agent and you go, oh, I don't use him. He gave his cards. Oh, I don't use him. He went around me. And all of a sudden, your name is Dirt. You better change the name. So that's sad.
And I think that's really important. One of my favorite things that I'm fortunate to have on my awards with what used to be Gig Masters is now the Bash, is the rapid responder, because I think it's absolutely vital. You're trying to do a job and you're trying to juggle two things: a client over here and a supplier over here. And if those people can't be joined together through you quickly, then the client will go elsewhere, the band doesn't
Mhm.
get work, you don't get paid. And it's very important to me when you're dealing with a booking agent, they're trying to help you get work. And
Right.
the best thing to do is to be as nice to them as possible and to bend over backwards to help work with them. And, over the years, you and I had many conversations about this client or about that job. And I think it's important when you are in business, particularly as a solo player, there's no buffer, but you don't have management and, roadies and booking. You're generally just dealing with people one on one. You have to have great interpersonal skills, and that means you have to be nice to people. It's a great idea not to be drunk or stoned when you talk to those people. And
Yeah.
it's a good idea to basically be the sort of person that you'd want to do business with. It's the golden rule, times six. But that's really, really important because I know there are a lot of people that you and I talked about that for whatever reason weren't able to do it. I'm grateful. In fact, I'll tell all of you folks that are listening to this podcast two important things that you can do when you decide to begin a solo career. And that is you find out who the best people in your market are and find out what they do, meet them if at all possible, and learn from them. I learned a ton of things from Kim O'Connor. I learned from
Mhm.
Yancey Stevens. I learned from you. I learned from all these different people. So that helped make my act better. But the other thing that I also did is I made sure to treat my relationship with you or anybody else that's getting me work just like I would a client. You're the most important person in the world for me to be able to do my best for the client and for the booking agent myself.
Right. Yeah. And that's what they look for. They look for that all those positive things. The more negative you have, the less on the list you become. Or in some cases, like I said, going around them, you're off the list completely, and you go from a few lists, if anything. So,
It's interesting because if you study the lives of session musicians, somebody like a Reggie Young or a Tommy Tedesco or any of these people
mhm,
that had become really big in their markets, they started off at the bottom of the totem pole, worked their way up by being trustworthy, by being dependable, by being on time. I'd never heard that Kim O'Connor story. It doesn't surprise me for a moment, but if you're going to be a professional and you're going to do your best to be professional, then there's I tell people for years there's two types of mentality: the employer mentality, or the employee mentality, and the entrepreneur mentality. An employee says my job is done at 5 o'clock. That's not my department, and they're you can count on for very little. An entrepreneur, on the other hand, their whole thing is what does it take? What's it going to take to get this taken care of? I'm completely responsible. I'll do whatever is within reason to make it happen. And
mhm.
if you can move from being an employee mentality to an entrepreneur mentality, particularly as a solo artist or as a solo musician, or even a duo trio, it will fundamentally change the trajectory of your success. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. You know,
So here's another question. Again, as I said, and you're the first booking agent that I'm talking to on this podcast, and I'm looking forward to talking with several other folks about this. But when you did this, you're spending a lot of time on the telephone every day, right?
you're spending all day on the telephone,
All
pretty
day.
much. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, in fact, we were the first people to have just a little microphone and earplug. I mean, 20 years ago when people did, oh, what is that on your? Yeah, because we spent all time talking. That's all it was talking.
So, how much of what you did, and again, as I said, your comments were absolutely accurate. Joan Frank was the oldest agency in Dallas and booked people for years. In fact, I've got years of contracts that I've saved and scanned on my computer when we booked jobs. When you or Brad had booked me for something. But I guess the big question about that, first of all, obviously you have to be comfortable talking to people and being on the
Yeah.
phone. How much of that was the phone ringing off the hook, you answering it, and how much of it was you drumming up business?
It depends when you're looking at. What happened was when I first started as a booking agent years ago, just after we bought it from Joan Frank, and that was the age of agencies, and it was so easy, but you had to know what you were doing. It wasn't that easy. You couldn't. You had to be able to understand the business and speak entertainernese. So, but when we first started, the phone would ring, and it'd be anything from a wedding all the way to IBM wanting to do a Christmas party, and they say, well, I'm looking at this, and they put packages together. But we never, the most I used to go out was to look for new entertainers, and also once in a while, like go to a customer and sit down with them, make them feel, because especially if they're spending a lot of money, make them feel like you're very attentive to what their needs are. But most of the time, it was on the phone, and I forget where I was going with this. the uh, it was very easy, and then 9/11 hit, and I think that for me that was a changing point. First of all, that year we hurt because I never seen so many things shut down. I mean, we're not doing a company picnic. We feel odd. We're not doing the Christmas party. We feel this isn't the right time. Another thing that bad that happened was after 9/11 and everybody canceled like crazy. A lot of companies the next year said, we didn't have a Christmas party and nobody cared. So don't worry about it. We're going to give everybody a turkey this year. And so there was a lot of that going on too. So that hurt. And then all of a sudden it became a business of calling people up. What are you doing? Are you going to do your Christmas party? Are you going to do your this? Are you going to do that? Calling people up, putting ads in wedding magazines, things like that. That part of it became a real hard job, and more, and then the internet started to come in. And I've got nothing against something like Gig Salad. I think it's great. People should book themselves. Book yourself as much as you can. But what happened was all these little incidental things that you can book yourself with is fine. That went away for the agent. What came for the agent was the company that calls up and says, I've got 4 months to put this monstrous, our 50th anniversary together. I don't have time for this. I'm going to fax you over a list or email you over a list of all the things we need. I'd like you to get it done within a week. And our budget's $50,000. And that's where the business started to become. This looking for brides to listen to bands and DJs went right out the window. They went to Gig Salad, and that's fine. But the big stuff, I need somebody to open up for Bo Diddley, that kind of thing. I need to find somebody. That's an agent's thing now, because that's where they had to find their money. Anybody who's still an agent is having to do big stuff. The other thing about agents that it's not part of the business, but when you book yourself, you don't get any feedback. Not really. You don't get any real feedback. I would hold my breath when I picked up my phone on a Monday morning to hear what happened over the weekend. And when it was just a simple, hey, the gig went great. Okay, got your check. I'll send it to you in the mail. That's fine. But then every once in a while you would get something. I don't want those guys in my place anymore because they did this. And when when you book yourself, no one's going to call you and say, I never want to see you again because of this. You just go on and think you're doing the right thing. But with the agent, I knew what you were doing wrong. And sometimes it wasn't even what you did. I even had a guy called and he says, I don't want them in my place no more. And I said, what happened? He goes, they drank too much. He goes, they just drank all night. So I called the band up. I said, what's this deal you're drinking? He says, we didn't drink a drop. He says, people get on the dance floor, would take their beer bottle and put it on the edge of the stage. By the end of the night, there was 50 beer bottles on the edge of the stage. Nobody took it down. So they never drank a drop. But this guy looked at the stage and says, these guys are drunk. So things like that happen, and you're not going to know it. If you booked yourself and you walk away and you're all sober, but there's 50 bottles of beer on the stage, you're not going to get that gig, and you didn't know why they don't call you back. There was a lot of that.
Wow. That's interesting. One other story that I remember you told me, we were talking about this is, gosh, probably 15 years ago.
Mm.
You're talking about a particular, I think it was a large band, maybe like an orchestra, and you said these guys are really good, but they don't do any new material. And
Hmm.
one of the things I had pointed out on an early podcast, a piano player, Steve Stroud, who played at the Anatole for years, great piano player.
Right.
And one of the most interesting pieces of advice he ever gave me, he said, Riley, he said, any one of these solo gigs, he said, you just have to be disciplined enough to always learn new material.
Right. I would think you would want to, especially, because it gets to be boring. In fact, people would, when I played, people would say, "What's your favorite song?" I said, "The one I learned this week." That's my favorite song because the other ones I've been doing for 5 years. This is great. Let me do this for you. It may
Yeah,
not be the best I do, but it's the one I enjoy the most.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I would think that gets to be too boring. I would want to do new material. You're right, though. They'd say, "Oh, they're good, but don't you do this? Don't you do that?" And again, without an agent, you never know that. You
It's
know.
absolutely true. It's absolutely true. So, a couple of questions. When you looked to when you were obviously when you're booking bands, when you look to take on somebody, remind us again some of the things you look for.
Like I said, first of all, be able to contact them immediately. That whole, there were people leave a message, I'll get with you in 48 hours or even 24 hours. It's too long. I need someone right away. Of course, it goes without saying talent and everything else, but they're going to be flexible. They're going to be reliant. They're going to show up on time. They're going to do their job. They're not going to take 2 hour breaks. They're not going to they're not going to hit the buffet without anybody asking them if they want to eat. Uh, Little things like that, just being super professional because that's all you're supposed to be. On top of your talent, if you're not professional, it's just not going to work for you, and you won't get those gigs anymore. And yet, at the same time, as a booking agent, there were some people that were really sharp. And I've known organizations. There was one church that did a Valentine's deal. They got the same people every year for like 10 years. That gig was yours on, February 13th. You were going to play that gig. It's like it doesn't go away. It just keeps coming. And if you don't play it right and you call and you say, "Could we I know you do that thing on February 13th." "Oh yeah, we got somebody else this year." You know, but they don't tell you the reason why we don't is because blah blah blah.
Yeah,
You don't hear that. You
yeah,
just don't get it.
yeah,
And like I said, I've seen people get certain gigs for years on end.
yeah, yeah. And it's incredible. I think one of the great things when we moved to Texas, as I said, I kind of had to throw myself on the mercy of people like yourself and other agents. And I was fortunate to get busy and to be able to do that because I had already done that in another market. And again, if you're starting off or you've just been doing it for a while, you have to go slowly. But I certainly suggest anybody in any market reach out to the booking agents and let them know about what it is that you do. I want to talk about pivoting right now. I said I was going to do that at the other podcast, but
Mhm.
one of the things that in your career you've done, like myself, a lot of pivoting. You start out playing rock and blues and on the bass guitar in New York, New Jersey, and then you end up adding these other instruments. Move to Texas, you're playing country and singing backup, and then you become a classical guitarist, then an Italian guitarist playing restaurants and singing, then a booking agent. And let's talk to everybody about what you pivoted and did after you decided you didn't want to do any of this anymore. You're writing.
Well, well, I had been writing for years. Like I said, I sold my first piece at 12 and I kept writing and I just wanted to be a musician too. And I got too old to where I didn't want to do these gigs anymore, this driving, this late night thing. And and then on top of it, like I said, being an agent, that changed. And Bradley, my friend, who also owned Joan Frank and did parties, he said, you know, we're taking people to all these party venues. Why don't we get our own party venue? So he bought
Yes.
and put the Southern Cross in. And that's been going on for it's almost 25 years. And it's a great venue. But that's one of the things that changed my life. because I was just doing booking agency and I was having a ball. And then he bought that property and he said, I need your help on this too. So I started spending more and more time on trying to book a venue than I was a booking agent. So little by little, I became less a booking agency and more of a, I don't know, an into, just trying to book a dude ranch, and that became a bore for me. But I stuck with it, and I loved the man, and he treated me well. And then as things got less and less of being a booking agent, I I stopped playing gigs. I said I got to do something. I went back to one of my first loves was writing. So I wrote a book, and an agent of books, an editor, got in touch with me. He says, "This isn't good. This stinks." He says, "You have talent, but this is not good. You need to. What you need to do is you need to start writing for magazines, learn your craft, and get your name out there." So for the next 20 years, that's what I did. And I just wrote magazines and everything else. And I was enjoying it, but I didn't have a book out, and I was just doing these magazines. And I even wrote for certain magazines for years. And finally, I submitted a short story to to a group, and I won a literary award. It came in first.
Nice.
And I said, well, gee, if I can, maybe I'm at a point, my name's been out, I know my craft a lot better. Again, going back to what we said about just doing it and doing it and loving it and doing it and getting better. And so I said, well, what if I made this into a book? I did, and it sold. So I said, I'd be a jerk not to do another one. And I did another one. And then on top of it, I hit a bestseller list on about the sixth one. And I said, I'd be a jerk not to keep this up. And now, like I said, at the end of the year, I'll be book number 30 is coming out. So I've been successful and blessed in a lot of ways with this. And when I was working at Southern Cross and Joan Frank, I came to Bradley and I said, my books are selling. I'd like to leave. And he says, could you stay one more year? And I said, all right. And it was the hardest year of my life because my brain didn't want to do that. But I also want to be a moral person because I could have locked the door and looked out the window for a year. But I said, no, I'm not going to rob this man. So I pushed myself and I was miserable. And then by then I had about a dozen books out. And I've been going strong every day. And I do the same thing I did when I was a musician or a booking agent. I get up in the morning, do my prayers, and then boom, get right down to it. And I do 6 hours and then go to the gym. And it's a good life, and I'm very blessed. And it's like everything else. If you love it, you're just going to do it. If you do it that much, you're going to get better at it. I guarantee you success. How much? I don't know. But if you love it, you'll do it a lot. If you do it a lot, you're going to get better. If you get better, you're going to be successful. That's it. Simple.
I think one of the great lessons that those of you all that are listening to this podcast that you would glean from Michael is that this is somebody that's obviously got several talents, but he also developed them. You know, we're both Christian men, and I think often of the Savior's parable about the talents. Right?
Mm-hmm.
This guy was given 4 talents and he magnified them and got 4 more talents. And this guy got two and he, magnified it and got 2 more. And this guy was said, well, you're an austere man and I knew you didn't reap where you sowed. So he stuck it in the ground and he basically said that wicked and slothful servant. And he took the talent and gave it to somebody else. And I think one of the things that would be probably appropriate to discuss at this point is that each of us come to earth and we have different skill sets and talents and abilities. Most of the folks that are listening to this have got some sort of musical and or vocal talent, perhaps both. But I think it behooves you to do your very best to develop that. Was it ever a time that you got a little frightened about, well, I'm going to jump from, being this kind of musician to a booking age, or I'm going to jump from this to that? Or were they pretty much smooth transitions because
I
you knew?
always overlapped things. I was always, I was playing. by the time before I could say I'm going to stop playing, I was doing something else at the same time. It was a little harder. So I didn't drop anything. I didn't burn bridges till I was on the other side. That's for sure. Yeah, yeah, and it can be done. It can be
That's
done.
that's tremendous. So, any final suggestions about anybody that, for example, might be in a band and they thought they wanted to do a solo act, or they just left a band and they're doing a solo act now? Any suggestions you would have for somebody that's transitioning from one to the next thing?
Just like I said, well, you have to have talent. You have to be professional. The only thing I would say was you have to be very self-reliant, because the two things I didn't like about playing by myself, which aren't particularly that bad, is one, I got lonesome. That driving home by yourself, I mean, you don't go out for breakfast with the guys. You're going home and you unpack everything and you put it in the garage and blah blah. So that was very lonesome. And another reason why I learned new songs all the time, because when I was in the band, I can jam. I can, okay, take a solo. Hey, that's different than last night. It's better than last night. It's not as good as last night. But when you're playing the same stuff every night, I need a new song, because maybe I'd sing it a little higher. I hit it, whatever. There's not that much versatility. It's pretty much your job. But you could do it if you love it enough and you will be professional. But that's just like saying, be a good human being and do things right. For some people, maybe that's hard, but yeah, you could do it. You could do it. I think the only money wise, I went from day to night and back to day again. It was incredible. I mean, it's not a lot of money. You don't get rich, but at the same time, to make $500 at a gig, I wasn't making $500. I mean, a five-piece group. I mean, they weren't going to pay, plus the soundman, and they weren't going. I wasn't making $3,000 that often to pay everybody in the band, but to get $500 for a gig, and all I had to do was bring in a 15-pound amp. It's night and day. It doesn't even count.
We
But
talked about that very briefly. In fact, tell us when the last solo iteration. I think you said you used a Trace Elliot amp and a guitar. What were you using for a guitar? And
oh, I was using well, eventually I broke it down to a Trace Elliot amp that also took a microphone. It had 15 settings for echo. Beautiful tone. I sold it since, and I was using a Yamaha classical guitar, and that also had all the works inside, all the power in it, and it was good because I could play classical guitar or I could just sing. I also brought because a lot of times I was working gigs where people were talking. Well, they're not dancing, they're talking. So I brought everything down an octave. I would sing down here because I could sing up here, but they don't, that blasts over everybody. They like the idea that there's music going on, but it's not the top of everything. They want you in the bottom. They want you somewhere in the middle, but they don't want you being taken over. So I did everything like that. You learn these things. You go, okay, so this is cocktail hour. They're paying me $500 to be able to talk while there's music going on. So what are you going to do? You're going to make a scene, or you're going to give them what you want, or don't do it. If you can't do it, don't do it. There's plenty of things in this world to do. Find something you love and enjoy the way to do it, and have a ball. That's all.
wonderful, wonderful. This has been so great. I've learned so much, and again, we've known one another for over a quarter of a century, so I've learned a whole lot.
Dude, sounds terrible.
It's been no, it's been great. It's been marvelous. In fact, I've learned a lot of things that I'm gonna. One of my guests, David Fortune, said that he listens to the podcasts and actually takes notes, and he's still working in his early 70s down in South Texas, and so there's a lot of information here that I'm going to go back and use, and I hope that our listeners will as well. Michael Edwin Q, thank you, my friend.
Thank you. Same here, pal. And God bless and keep going.
Thank you very much. You've been listening to the Band of One podcast. I am Riley Wilson, and thanks for joining us for this podcast. If you like what we do, please be sure to subscribe and share the podcast with others. You can reach out and get in touch with me through our webpage, which is guitarmadesimpler.com, or the Facebook Band of One podcast. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.